The gunshot echoed across the canyon just as the storm broke, and Franklin Xavier didn't need to see the woman stumbling down the rocky slope to know she was running from something worse than the rain. He'd been tracking a missing mare for the better part of 3 days when the weather turned, transforming the dusty California foothills into a slick maze of mud and stone. The year was 1878, and Marysville lay some 15 miles behind him, but Franklin had learned long ago that distance meant nothing when trouble found you. He pulled his hat lower against the driving rain and urged his gelding toward the figure he'd spotted through the downpour. She was moving with the desperate gait of someone who'd forgotten how to feel her own legs, all instinct and terror propelling her forward. When he got close enough to see her clearly, Franklin felt something tighten in his chest. Her dress, once a respectable blue calico, hung in tatters around her knees, caked with mud that spoke of hard miles traveled. Her dark hair had come loose from whatever pins had once held it, plastered against her face and shoulders by the rain. She didn't seem to notice him at first, just kept stumbling forward until her foot caught on a root and she went down hard. Franklin was off his horse before conscious thought could catch up with instinct. He didn't ask her what had happened or who she was running from. Questions could wait. Right now she needed help, and that was all that mattered in this moment. "Easy now," he said, keeping his voice low and steady as he approached. "I'm not going to hurt you." She looked up at him with eyes the color of honey, wide with fear and exhaustion. For a heartbeat, she seemed ready to bolt again, but then her body made the decision her mind couldn't. She collapsed back into the mud, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Franklin shrugged out of his oilskin coat and draped it around her shoulders without ceremony. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered, and he could see scratches covering her arms, some fresh enough to still be bleeding. Whatever she'd been through, it had been recent and violent. "Can you ride?" he asked. She nodded, though Franklin doubted she had the strength to stay upright. Still, there was a stubborn set to her jaw that told him this woman had reserves of strength that ran deeper than the physical. He helped her to her feet, taking most of her weight as they made their way to where his gelding waited with the patience of a horse long accustomed to unusual situations. Getting her into the saddle took some doing. She tried to help, tried to pull herself up, but her arms gave out halfway and Franklin had to lift her bodily onto the horse. She made a small sound of protest, but it died quickly as exhaustion won out over pride. Franklin swung up behind her, gathering the reins in one hand while his other arm circled her waist to keep her steady. "There's a line shack about 2 miles north," he said against her ear, loud enough to be heard over the rain. "We'll shelter there until this passes." She didn't respond, just leaned back against his chest with a surrender that spoke of complete depletion. Franklin could feel every shiver that ran through her, could feel how cold she'd become. He urged the gelding into a steady walk, knowing that speed mattered less than surefootedness in this weather. The ride to the line shack felt longer than 2 miles. The woman in his arms drifted in and out of consciousness, her head lolling against his shoulder. Franklin found himself talking to her, nonsense mostly, just to keep her from slipping too far away. He told her about Marysville, about the mare he'd been tracking, about the way the foothills looked when spring came and everything turned green. He didn't know if she heard him, but her shivering seemed to lessen slightly, so he kept talking. When the line shack finally appeared through the rain, Franklin felt a relief so profound it surprised him. He'd used this shelter before, knew it was stocked with basic supplies that the ranchers in the area maintained for emergencies. This certainly qualified. He dismounted carefully, then helped the woman down. Her legs buckled the moment her feet touched ground and Franklin caught her easily, lifting her into his arms. She weighed less than she should, he thought, and wondered how long she'd been running, how long since she'd eaten. The door to the line shack was unlocked, as was the custom. Franklin kicked it open and carried her inside, grateful to be out of the rain even if the interior was dark and musty. He settled her into the single chair, then moved quickly to light the oil lamp that hung near the door. Warm light flooded the small space, revealing rough walls, a narrow bunk, a small stove, and shelves stocked with canned goods and supplies. "Let me get a fire going," Franklin said, moving to the stove. His hands worked automatically, building kindling and striking a match. The fire caught quickly, and soon warmth began to spread through the small room. The woman hadn't moved from the chair. She sat with Franklin's coat still draped around her shoulders, staring at the growing flames with an expression Franklin couldn't quite read. Not quite blank, but somewhere beyond exhaustion, beyond fear, into a territory he recognized from his time in the war. The look of someone who'd seen too much and was trying to process it all. Franklin found a bucket and stepped back into the rain long enough to fill it from the barrel that sat beside the shack. Back inside, he set it on the stove to heat, then turned his attention to the shelves. He found coffee, beans, hardtack, and a tin of peaches. Not a feast, but enough. "What's your name?" he asked as he worked, keeping his tone conversational, non-threatening. She was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer. Then, in a voice rough from disuse or screaming or both, she said, "Theresa Dalton." "I'm Franklin Xavier," he replied, measuring coffee into the pot. "Most folks call me Frank." "Thank you," Theresa said, and there was something in those two words that made Franklin's chest tighten again. Such profound gratitude for such basic human decency. It made him angry, though he was careful not to let that show. "No need for thanks," he said. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," she said quietly. "They wouldn't have." Franklin let that sit while he finished preparing the coffee. When it was ready, he poured her a cup and brought it over, wrapping her cold hands around the warm tin. She held it like it was precious, breathing in the steam before taking a careful sip. The water on the stove had heated enough. Franklin found a relatively clean cloth among the supplies and dampened it, then crouched down in front of Theresa's chair. "You've got some cuts that need tending," he said, gesturing to her arms. "May I?" She hesitated, then nodded. Franklin worked gently, cleaning the scratches and deeper cuts as best he could. Some of them were going to need better attention than he could provide here, but at least they'd be clean. Theresa sat perfectly still through the process, though he saw her flinch once or twice when he hit a particularly tender spot. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "Don't be," she replied. "You're helping. That's more than I had any right to expect." There was a story there, Franklin knew, but he held to his initial instinct. Questions could wait. Right now, she needed warmth, food, and rest. Everything else would come in its own time. He heated the beans and opened the tin of peaches, serving everything on the mismatched plates he found on the shelf. Theresa ate slowly at first, as if she'd forgotten how, then with increasing hunger. Franklin was glad to see it. Color was beginning to return to her face, and the violent shivering had finally stopped. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the hills, but inside the line shack, warmth and lamplight created a small pocket of safety. Franklin ate his own meal in silence, giving Theresa space to gather herself. He watched her from the corner of his eye, noting the way her hands had steadied, the way some of the tension had left her shoulders. She was beautiful, he realized, though that was perhaps the least important thing about her in this moment. Her face had good bones, strong and defined, with a mouth that looked like it was made for smiling even though he hadn't seen her do so yet. Her eyes, when she finally looked up and met his gaze, held intelligence and strength alongside the fear. "I was engaged to be married," she said suddenly, the words spilling out as if they'd been held back too long. "To Marcus Brennan. He owned a ranch south of here, or so he said. Everything he told me was a lie." Franklin set down his plate and gave her his full attention. He didn't speak, just waited for her to continue. "I came out from Ohio 6 months ago. We'd been corresponding for nearly a year before that. He seemed kind in his letters, thoughtful. Said he needed a wife to help him build his ranch to make a home with. I thought I was so fortunate." Her laugh was bitter. "I was such a fool." "You weren't foolish for believing someone," Franklin said quietly. "That makes you trusting, not foolish. The fault lies with the man who deceived you." Theresa looked at him with surprise, as if she hadn't expected that response. "He wasn't building a ranch. He was running a gang of thieves and worse. I didn't realize until we reached his place and I saw what was really happening there. Men coming and going at all hours, stolen goods, talk of robberies planned. And the way he changed once we were there." She shuddered. "The way he looked at me, like I was property he'd acquired." Franklin felt his jaw tighten. He'd known men like that, had seen what they were capable of. "I tried to leave yesterday morning," Theresa continued. "Tried to slip away while they were all sleeping. But he woke up, caught me before I made it 100 yards. He dragged me back, said I wasn't going anywhere, that I was his whether I liked it or not. He locked me in a room, told me I'd better get used to my new life because I wasn't leaving it." "But you did leave," Franklin said. "The storm started this afternoon. Everyone was distracted, securing things, bringing in horses. I broke the window and climbed out. Tore my dress on the glass, but I didn't care. I just ran. I heard him shouting, heard a gunshot, but I didn't look back. I just kept running." She fell silent, staring into her empty coffee cup. Franklin stood and refilled it for her, then added more wood to the fire. The rain showed no signs of letting up, which was probably for the best. It would make tracking her difficult if Brennan decided to come looking. "How far is his place from here?" Franklin asked. "I don't know exactly. I ran for hours. Through the storm, through the hills." "I lost track of time and distance." Franklin nodded. "Well, he won't be tracking anyone in this weather. Come morning, we'll head into Marysville. You'll be safe there." "Will I?" Theresa asked, and there was such doubt in her voice that it hurt to hear. "What's to stop him from coming for me there? What's to stop him from claiming I'm his intended, that I ran away from him? Who will believe me over him?" It was a fair question, and one that made Franklin's anger burn hotter. She was right to be worried. In 1878 California, a woman's word often counted for less than a man's, especially if that man had money or influence. "I'll believe you," Franklin said firmly. "And I know others who will too. The sheriff in Marysville is a good man, honest, and you won't be alone in this. I give you my word on that." Theresa studied his face for a long moment, as if searching for deception or hidden motives. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her, because she nodded slowly. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "You don't know me. I could be lying about everything." "You're not, though," Franklin said simply. "And as for why, because it's the right thing to do. Because I was raised to help people when they need it. Because leaving you out there in that storm wasn't something I could live with." He paused, then added more quietly, "Because someone I cared about once needed help and didn't get it. I won't make that mistake with someone else." There was a story behind those words too, Theresa could tell, but she didn't press. Instead, she pulled his coat tighter around her shoulders and said, "Thank you, Franklin, truly." "Frank," he corrected gently. "And you're welcome, Theresa." The storm raged on through the night. Franklin gave Theresa the bunk and made himself as comfortable as possible on the floor near the fire. He slept lightly, one ear always tuned for sounds of danger, but nothing disturbed them beyond the wind and rain. When he woke near dawn, the storm had finally passed, leaving the world washed clean and dripping. Theresa was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bunk. Someone had tried to comb her hair with their fingers, and she'd managed to braid it loosely. She looked better than she had the night before, though the fear hadn't entirely left her eyes. "Morning," Franklin said, stirring the fire back to life. "How are you feeling?" "Sore," she admitted. "But better, clearer." Franklin made more coffee, and they ate a simple breakfast of hardtack softened in hot water, not appetizing but functional. As they ate, Franklin laid out his plan. "We'll ride into Marysville this morning. I know a woman there, Mrs. Patterson, who runs a boarding house. She's good people, discreet. You can stay with her while we sort out what to do about Brennan." "I don't have any money," Theresa said quietly. "Everything I brought with me is still at his ranch. What little I had." "Don't worry about that right now," Franklin replied. "We'll figure it out." The ride back to Marysville took most of the morning. Franklin kept them to an easy pace, watchful for any signs of pursuit. Theresa rode behind him again, but she was stronger now, able to hold on without assistance. She didn't talk much during the ride, but Franklin could feel her gradually relaxing as they put more distance between themselves and whatever horror she'd fled. Marysville itself was a decent-sized town, prosperous from the mining operations that still dotted the area, even though the great gold rush had ended decades ago. The main street bustled with activity as they rode in, and Franklin was grateful for the crowd. They'd blend in easier, be harder to spot if anyone came looking. Mrs. Patterson's boarding house sat on a quieter side street, a well-maintained two-story building with a neat garden in front. Franklin helped Theresa down from the horse, and they walked up to the front door together. He knocked, and after a moment it swung open to reveal a handsome woman in her 50s, her gray-streaked hair pulled back in a tidy bun. "Franklin Xavier," she said with pleasure, then took in Theresa's bedraggled appearance, and her expression shifted to concern. "What's happened?" "Miss Dalton needs a safe place to stay," Franklin said simply. "I was hoping you might have a room available." Mrs. Patterson's shrewd eyes moved between them, reading the situation quickly. "Of course. Come in, both of you." Inside, the boarding house was as neat and comfortable as its exterior promised. Mrs. Patterson led them to a small sitting room and gestured for them to sit. "Tell me what you need," she said, addressing Franklin but looking at Theresa with kindness. Franklin gave her the broad strokes of the situation, leaving out the more painful details, but making it clear that Theresa was in potential danger. Mrs. Patterson listened without interrupting, her expression growing progressively more stern. "That Marcus Brennan has been nothing but trouble since he showed up in this territory," she said when Franklin finished. "I've heard rumors about his operation, though nothing anyone could prove. Sheriff Thompson has been keeping an eye on him." "Then Thompson knows about him?" Franklin asked. "Suspects, at least. But Brennan's been careful, and without proof or witnesses willing to come forward, there's not much that can be done." Mrs. Patterson looked at Theresa. "You'd be willing to testify to what you saw?" "Yes," Theresa said without hesitation. "If it means stopping him, yes." "Brave girl," Mrs. Patterson said approvingly. "And don't you worry about payment or any such thing. You'll stay here as long as you need, no charge. Any enemy of Marcus Brennan is a friend of mine." Relief washed over Theresa's face. "Thank you. I don't know how I'll ever repay all this kindness." "You already are, by being willing to stand up to that man," Mrs. Patterson replied. She stood, all business now. "Let me show you to a room. You'll want a proper bath and some clean clothes. I think I have a dress or two that will fit you well enough." As Mrs. Patterson led Theresa upstairs, Franklin remained in the sitting room, his mind working through the problem of Brennan. They needed to act quickly, before the man could establish any kind of counter-narrative. He needed to talk to Sheriff Thompson, needed to gather what evidence they could. Mrs. Patterson returned after a few minutes. She's settling in. Poor thing is exhausted for all she's trying to be strong about it. She is strong, Franklin said. Stronger than she probably knows. And what about you, Frank? What's your stake in all this? It was a fair question. Franklin considered his answer carefully. I found someone who needed help, that's all. Is it? Mrs. Patterson's look was knowing. I've known you for 5 years now, and I've never seen you bring a woman to my door before. Because I've never found one in need before, Franklin replied, but he could feel heat creeping up his neck. Was it that obvious? The way he'd felt protective of Theresa from the moment he'd seen her stumbling through the storm. The way he'd wanted to hunt down Brennan for what he'd done to her. Well, Mrs. Patterson said, a small smile playing at her lips. Whatever your reasons, you did right by her. Now go talk to Sheriff Thompson. The sooner we deal with Brennan, the sooner that girl can start healing. Franklin found Sheriff Thompson at his office, a lean, weathered man in his 50s who'd kept the peace in Marysville for the better part of a decade. He listened to Franklin's account with increasing interest, making notes in a worn leather journal. I've been waiting for someone to come forward about Brennan, Thompson said when Franklin finished. We've had reports of robberies, stage holdups, even a few murders that might tie back to his gang, but nothing concrete. If Miss Dalton can provide testimony about what she saw, that might be enough for me to get a warrant and ride out there. When? Franklin asked. Tomorrow at the earliest. I'll need to gather some men I trust, and I'll want to talk to Miss Dalton first, get her full statement. Thompson studied Franklin. You planning to come along? Yes, Franklin said without hesitation, figured as much. Thompson stood and retrieved a deputy's badge from his desk drawer. Then you might as well make it official. You're deputized. Franklin took the badge, weighing it in his palm. He'd served as a deputy before in other towns, other situations. It always seemed to find him, this need to stand between people and danger. One more thing, Thompson said. Brennan's got money and connections. This won't be simple, even with Miss Dalton's testimony. He'll fight back, legally and possibly otherwise. You prepared for that? Yes, Franklin said simply. Good man. Thompson came around the desk and shook Franklin's hand. Bring Miss Dalton by this afternoon if she's up to it. The sooner I get her statement, the sooner we can move. Franklin returned to Mrs. Patterson's boarding house to find Theresa transformed. She'd bathed and changed into a simple green dress that brought out the color of her eyes. Her hair was properly pinned now, and the scratches on her arms had been treated with better care than Franklin's rough field medicine. She looked rested, or at least less exhausted than before. The sheriff wants to take your statement, Franklin told her. Are you ready for that? Theresa nodded. I want to do this. I want to make sure he can't hurt anyone else. They walked to the sheriff's office together, and Franklin found himself acutely aware of her presence beside him. The way she held herself straight despite obvious discomfort, the set of her jaw that spoke of determination. She'd been through something terrible and was choosing to face it head-on rather than hide. It was remarkable. Sheriff Thompson was gentle but thorough in his questioning. He took Theresa through everything, from her initial correspondence with Brennan to her escape through the storm. He wrote it all down carefully, occasionally asking for clarification. Theresa answered every question honestly, though Franklin could see how much it cost her to relive those events. When it was done, Thompson set down his pen and looked at Theresa with respect. Thank you, Miss Dalton. This takes courage. I want you to know that. When will you go after him? Theresa asked. Tomorrow morning, first light. I'll take Frank here and 4 other men I trust. We'll arrest Brennan and anyone else at that ranch who's wanted for crimes. With your testimony and whatever evidence we find there, we should be able to make charges stick. Will I have to see him? The fear in Theresa's voice was palpable. At a trial. Eventually, yes, Thompson said gently, but not until you're ready, and you won't face him alone. I promise you that. They left the sheriff's office as afternoon was stretching into evening. Theresa was quiet, processing everything. Franklin walked her back to the boarding house, hyper-aware of the fading light, of any potential threats. Will you stay for dinner? Theresa asked as they reached Mrs. Patterson's door. I'd like the company if you don't mind. I'd be glad to, Franklin replied. Mrs. Patterson had prepared a simple but hearty meal, and the 3 of them ate together in the boarding house's small dining room. The conversation was light, deliberately so, steering clear of heavy topics. Mrs. Patterson told stories about the early days of Marysville, when it had been little more than a mining camp. Franklin shared tales from his years working cattle ranches across California and Nevada. Theresa listened, occasionally adding her own observations, slowly relaxing as the evening wore on. After dinner, Mrs. Patterson excused herself to attend to other boarders, leaving Franklin and Theresa alone in the sitting room. A comfortable fire burned in the hearth, and the last light of day filtered through lace curtains. Can I ask you something? Theresa said after a stretch of silence. Of course. Earlier, at the line shack, you mentioned someone you cared about who needed help and didn't get it. What did you mean? Franklin was quiet for a long moment, debating how much to share. Then he decided that Theresa had been honest with him. She deserved the same in return. Her name was Margaret. We grew up together back in Missouri. I was 20. She was 19. We were planning to marry when I got back from the war. But while I was gone, a man in town took a fancy to her. When she refused his advances, he spread rumors about her, ruined her reputation. By the time I came home, she'd left town. No one knew where she'd gone, or if they did, they wouldn't tell me. I searched for months but never found any trace of her. I'm sorry, Theresa said softly. It taught me something, though, that when someone needs help, you give it. No hesitation, no questions. Because you never know when your chance to help might be the last one they get. Theresa reached across the space between them and took his hand. The gesture was simple but profound. You're a good man, Franklin Xavier. Just Frank, he said, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. And I'm just a man doing what anyone should do. That's not true, Theresa replied. Most men wouldn't have stopped for me yesterday. Most men would have ridden right past, not wanting to get involved. But you stopped. You helped without asking for anything in return. That makes you better than most. Franklin didn't know what to say to that, so he just held her hand and let the moment stretch between them. Outside, Marysville settled into night, and somewhere out there, Marcus Brennan remained free. But here, in this warm room with Theresa's hand in his, Franklin felt something he hadn't expected to feel. Hope. Not just for bringing Brennan to justice, but for something more personal. Something that scared him with its intensity. He'd known this woman for barely a day, but already she'd gotten under his skin in a way no one had since Margaret. The way she faced her fear, the way she smiled when misses. Patterson made a joke, the way she looked at him like he was something more than just a cowboy who'd happened to be in the right place at the right time. It was dangerous to feel this way so quickly. He knew that, but knowing it didn't seem to make any difference. I should let you rest, Franklin said reluctantly. Tomorrow will be a long day. Will you come back? Theresa asked. After you go with the sheriff? Yes, Franklin promised. I'll come back. He stood to leave, but Theresa didn't release his hand. Frank, be careful tomorrow. I know Brennan. He won't come quietly. I'll be careful, he assured her. You have my word. Franklin left the boarding house and made his way to the small room he rented above the general store. Sleep didn't come easily. His mind was too full of plans for tomorrow, of worry about what they might face at Brennan's ranch, of thoughts about Theresa Dalton, and the way his life had suddenly become complicated in ways he hadn't anticipated. Dawn came too quickly. Franklin met Sheriff Thompson and 4 other deputies at the jail as the sun was just beginning to pink the eastern sky. They were all good men, experienced and level-headed. Thompson had chosen well. The ride to Brennan's ranch took 3 hours, following directions Theresa had provided. The place sat in a narrow valley, well hidden from the main roads. As they approached, Franklin could see why Brennan had chosen this location. It offered good sightlines and only a few approaches, making it easy to defend if necessary. They didn't try for stealth. Thompson rode straight up to the main house with his deputies flanking him, badges visible and hands near their weapons. Men emerged from the bunkhouse and barn, rough-looking types who stopped dead when they saw the law had arrived. "Marcus Brennan," Thompson called out. "This is Sheriff Thompson from Marysville. I have a warrant for your arrest. Come out peacefully and no one needs to get hurt." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the door to the main house opened and a man stepped out. He was tall and well-dressed, with dark hair and the kind of handsome face that probably opened a lot of doors for him. But his eyes were cold, calculating. "On what charges, Sheriff?" Brennan asked smoothly. "Kidnapping, false imprisonment, conspiracy to commit robbery, and about a dozen other things I'll be adding as we go through this place," Thompson replied. "Now are you coming peacefully, or do we have to do this the hard way?" Brennan's gaze swept across the deputies, lingering on Franklin. "Who's this? I don't recognize him." "Deputy Xavier," Franklin said evenly. "And yes, before you ask, I'm the one who found Miss Dalton after she escaped from you." Something flickered in Brennan's eyes. Anger, yes, but also calculation. "Is that what she told you, that she escaped?" "The woman ran off in the middle of a storm because we had an argument about wedding plans. I've been worried sick about her." "That's not how she tells it," Thompson said. "And I believe her. Now you can come with us and tell your story to a judge, or we can arrest you by force. Your choice." Franklin saw Brennan's hand twitch toward his hip and his own hand move to his weapon. But before either man could draw, one of the other deputies had his rifle trained on Brennan. "Don't be stupid," Thompson said coldly. "You're outnumbered and outgunned. Come quietly." For a moment, Franklin thought Brennan might try it anyway. There was a reckless edge to him, the kind of man who believed his own luck would hold forever. But then his shoulders sagged slightly and he raised his hands. "Fine. But I want it known that I'm cooperating under protest. This is all a misunderstanding." They arrested Brennan and 3 of his men who had outstanding warrants. The search of the property turned up stolen goods, evidence of the robberies Brennan had been planning, and a ledger that detailed criminal activities going back months. It was more than enough to ensure Brennan would face serious time in prison, possibly even hang if they could connect him to any of the murders. The ride back to Marysville took longer with prisoners in tow. Brennan remained silent for most of it, but as they neared town, he spoke up. "You think you've won something here, Xavier?" His voice was poisonous. "You think that woman is going to fall into your arms grateful and willing? She's damaged goods now, used up. No decent man will want her after what's happened." Franklin's jaw clenched, but he didn't respond. Engaging with Brennan would give the man what he wanted. "I see the way you look at her," Brennan continued. "Like she's something precious, but she's not. She's just another woman who thought she could do better than what she was offered and learned the hard way that life doesn't work like that." "Shut your mouth," Franklin said quietly, the words carrying more menace than if he'd shouted. Brennan laughed. Touched a nerve, did I? Well, enjoy your damaged prize, deputy. Maybe she'll be grateful enough to warm your bed for a while before she realizes you're just another fool who thinks he can save someone. Sheriff Thompson turned in his saddle. Brennan, if you say one more word, I'll gag you for the rest of the ride. Test me on that. Brennan fell silent, but the damage was done. His words had burrowed into Franklin's mind like thorns. Not because he believed them about Theresa, but because he recognized the ugliness in them, the way men like Brennan reduced women to property, to objects to be used and discarded. It made him sick and angry in equal measure. They locked Brennan and his men in the Marysville jail as afternoon was turning to evening. Thompson would send word to Sacramento, and within a few days, a judge would arrive to begin proceedings. But for now, Brennan was secure and Theresa was safe. Franklin went straight to Mrs. Patterson's boarding house. He found Theresa in the sitting room, working on some mending. She looked up when he entered, and the relief on her face was immediate and profound. "You're all right," she said, standing. "I'm fine. And Brennan's in jail along with some of his men. It's over, Theresa." She swayed slightly, and Franklin moved quickly to steady her. "It's really over, the arrest is. There'll be a trial and you'll need to testify, but he can't hurt you anymore. That part is over." Theresa's eyes filled with tears, and then she was pressing her face against Franklin's chest and crying in earnest. He held her, one hand stroking her back, making soothing sounds until the storm of emotion passed. When she finally pulled back, wiping at her eyes, she looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to fall apart like that." "You've earned the right to fall apart," Franklin said gently, "and you've got nothing to apologize for." Mrs. Patterson appeared with tea and biscuits, giving them both knowing looks but saying nothing. She set the tray down and disappeared again, leaving them alone. "Tell me what happened," Theresa said, and Franklin did, leaving out only Brennan's poisonous words on the ride back. She didn't need to hear that ugliness. They talked through the evening, comfortable in each other's company in a way that should have been impossible for two people who'd known each other such a short time. Franklin found himself telling her about his life, about the years after the war when he drifted from place to place, never quite finding where he belonged. Theresa shared her own story, growing up in Ohio, losing her parents to fever and making the desperate decision to come west for a new start. "I thought I was being so brave," she said with a sad smile. "Answering that advertisement, agreeing to marry a stranger. I thought I was taking control of my own destiny. Instead, I nearly destroyed it." "You were brave," Franklin insisted. "You are brave. You took a chance on making a better life for yourself. That took courage. And when things went wrong, you didn't just accept it. You fought back. You escaped. You're here now, safe, because you refused to give up. With your help," Theresa pointed out. "I was just in the right place at the right time. You did the hard part." Theresa studied him for a long moment. "Why do you do that? Deflect credit away from yourself." "Because I didn't do anything special. I just helped someone who needed it." "That is special, Frank. More than you seem to realize." She reached out and took his hand again, and Franklin marveled at how natural that gesture had become between them. "I know we haven't known each other very long, but I want you to know that meeting you, having you help me, it's changed something in me. You've given me back hope that there are good men in this world." Franklin felt his throat tighten. "There are, plenty of them. You just had the misfortune to meet a bad one first." "Maybe," Theresa said softly. "Or maybe I had to meet the bad one to appreciate the good one when he came along." The air between them seemed charged suddenly, heavy with possibility. Franklin knew he should probably stand up, make some excuse, put some distance between them before this went somewhere complicated. But he didn't want to. He wanted to stay right here, holding Theresa's hand, looking into her honey-colored eyes and seeing his own feelings reflected back. "Theresa," he began, not sure what he was going to say. "I know," she interrupted gently. "I know it's too soon. I know I'm still sorting through everything that's happened, but I also know that what I feel when I'm with you is real, and I don't want to ignore that just because the timing isn't perfect." "Neither do I," Franklin admitted, "but I also don't want to rush you into anything. You've been through a trauma. I don't want to take advantage of that." "You couldn't take advantage of me if you tried," Theresa said with a small smile. "I'm not some delicate thing that will break at the first touch. I'm stronger than that, and I know my own mind. I know that I feel safe with you. I know that when you look at me, you see me, not some prize or possession, and I know that I want to spend more time with you, getting to know you better." "I want that too," Franklin said honestly, "more than I probably should." "Then let's start there," Theresa suggested. "Let's take it slowly, let things develop naturally. No pressure, no expectations. Just two people who are interested in each other, seeing where it leads." It was a sensible plan, mature and measured. Franklin agreed to it wholeheartedly. But even as they sat there making careful plans about taking things slowly, he could feel the current running between them, strong and undeniable. This woman had gotten into his heart faster than should have been possible, and he suspected that no amount of careful planning was going to change that. The next weeks passed in a strange sort of limbo. Brennan remained in jail awaiting trial. Theresa stayed at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, gradually healing from her ordeal, and Franklin found himself spending more and more time in Marysville, inventing reasons to stay close. He helped Theresa recover her belongings from Brennan's ranch, or what was left of them. Most had been destroyed or sold, but they managed to salvage a few personal items, including a locket that had belonged to her mother. Theresa cried when she saw it, clutching it to her chest like it was the most precious thing in the world. They took walks together through Marysville, Franklin showing her the town properly. The general store where he rented his room, the church with its white steeple, the river where miners still panned for gold even though the easy pickings were long gone. Theresa seemed to drink it all in, storing away details about her new home. Because it was becoming her home, Franklin realized. She'd stopped talking about going back to Ohio or moving on to somewhere else. She was putting down roots here, making friends with Mrs. Patterson and some of the other women in town. She'd even found work helping out at the general store, which gave her a sense of purpose and independence. They had dinner together most evenings, sometimes at the boarding house, sometimes at the small restaurant on Main Street. They talked about everything and nothing, learning each other's habits and preferences. Franklin discovered that Theresa liked her coffee strong and her eggs scrambled soft. That she could quote long passages of poetry from memory. That she had a sharp sense of humor that emerged once she felt safe enough to show it. Theresa learned that Franklin was an early riser who couldn't sit still for long. That he'd taught himself to read during the war by trading tobacco for books. That he had a particular weakness for apple pie and would go out of his way to get a good piece. That underneath his quiet exterior was a man of deep feeling who loved fiercely when he allowed himself to love at all. The attraction between them grew stronger with each passing day, but they honored their agreement to take things slowly. There were moments when Franklin wanted nothing more than to pull Theresa into his arms and kiss her until neither of them could think straight. But he held back, content to let their relationship develop at its own pace. The trial finally began in late June. A judge arrived from Sacramento, and the proceedings were held in Marysville's small courthouse. Theresa testified on the second day, and Franklin sat in the gallery watching her face down the man who tried to imprison her. She was magnificent, clear and strong in her testimony, never wavering even when Brennan's lawyer tried to shake her story. Brennan himself sat at the defense table looking smug, as if he didn't believe any of this would stick. But as the prosecution presented evidence, as other witnesses came forward with their own stories of Brennan's crimes, that smugness began to crack. The trial lasted 5 days. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning with a guilty verdict on all major charges. Brennan would be sent to San Quentin to serve a sentence of 20 years. Given the conditions at that prison, it was unlikely he'd survive the full term. Franklin was standing outside the courthouse with Theresa when the sentence was read. He felt her hand tighten in his, saw the way her shoulders straightened. "It's really over now," she said quietly. "It is," Franklin confirmed. "You're free of him, Theresa, completely free." She turned to face him, and there were tears on her cheeks, but they were good tears this time. "I couldn't have done this without you. You know that, don't you?" "You would have found a way," Franklin said. "You're strong enough." "Maybe, but I'm glad I didn't have to find out." She hesitated, then said, "What happens now that this is over?" It was the question Franklin had been asking himself. The reason he'd come to Marysville in the first place, that missing mare, had been found weeks ago. He had no official reason to stay, but he also had no desire to leave. "I was thinking I might stay in Marysville for a while," he said carefully, "if that would be all right with you." Theresa's smile was like the sun coming out. "I'd like that. I'd like that very much." That evening, Franklin walked Theresa back to the boarding house through the warm summer twilight. Fireflies danced in Mrs. Patterson's garden, and somewhere down the street, someone was playing a fiddle. It was peaceful and perfect, and Franklin felt something settle in his chest that had been restless for as long as he could remember. They stopped at the front gate, and Theresa turned to face him. "Thank you for today, for being there during the trial. It meant everything." "I wouldn't have been anywhere else," Franklin replied. They stood close together, the space between them charged with possibility. Franklin raised his hand slowly, giving Theresa plenty of time to pull away if she wanted. When she didn't, he cupped her cheek gently, his thumb brushing across her skin. "Theresa," he said softly, "I know we said we'd take things slowly, and if you want to keep doing that, I understand. But I need you to know something. I'm in love with you. I have been almost since the moment I found you in that storm, and if you'll have me, I'd like to court you properly, with the goal of making this permanent." Theresa's breath caught. For a moment, she just stared at him, and Franklin's heart hammered in his chest. Then she smiled, reaching up to cover his hand with her own. "I'm in love with you too," she said. "I think I have been since you wrapped your coat around me and asked no questions, just gave help. Yes, Frank. Yes to all of it." Franklin leaned down slowly, giving Theresa every chance to change her mind. When his lips finally met hers, it was gentle and reverent, a promise more than a passion. But the passion was there too, banked and waiting for the right time. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "I should go inside," Theresa said, though she made no move to do so. "Probably," Franklin agreed, equally reluctant to end the moment. She laughed, the sound light and free. "Walk me to the door," he did, and they shared another kiss on Mrs. Patterson's porch, this one longer and deeper. When Theresa finally went inside, Franklin stood in the garden for a long moment, grinning like a fool. He felt 17 again, full of hope and possibility. The next months were the happiest of Franklin's life. He took a permanent job as a deputy under Sheriff Thompson, which gave him steady work and a reason to stay in Marysville. He courted Theresa properly, with flowers and Sunday dinners and long walks along the river. Mrs. Patterson watched their romance develop with satisfaction, occasionally making knowing comments about wedding preparations. Theresa bloomed under the attention and safety. The fear that had haunted her eyes gradually faded, replaced by confidence and joy. She was making a real life for herself in Marysville, with friends and work she found meaningful. But more than that, she was discovering who she was when she wasn't living in fear. They talked about their future in careful increments, building towards something neither wanted to rush but both knew was inevitable. Franklin told Theresa about his dream of having a small ranch, a place of his own after so many years of drifting. Theresa shared her hopes of making a real home, the kind she'd lost when her parents died. It was clear to both of them where this was heading, but they were content to let it unfold naturally. They'd both been through enough trauma and uncertainty. This time, they wanted to do things right. The proposal came on a September evening, 6 months after that storm-drenched night when Franklin had first found Theresa. They'd ridden out to a spot overlooking the valley, watching the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and gold. The air was cooling as summer gave way to fall, and Theresa had Franklin's jacket draped around her shoulders. "This is beautiful," she said contentedly. "Thank you for bringing me here." "I wanted you to see it," Franklin replied. "This land is for sale. 500 acres, good water, decent grazing. The owner's moving back east and needs to sell quickly." Theresa looked at him with dawning understanding. "Frank," he took her hand, his heart pounding. "I love you, Theresa. I want to build a life with you, a real life. I want to buy this land and build us a home on it. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep with you every night. I want to build something lasting, something ours." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. "Will you marry me?" Theresa's eyes filled with happy tears. "Yes. Oh yes, Frank. Yes to all of it." He slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her as the sun set behind them, painting the sky in glory. It felt like a beginning, like everything that had come before was just prologue to this moment. They were married in October, in Marysville's white-steepled church with Mrs. Patterson and Sheriff Thompson standing as witnesses. Theresa wore a new dress, pale blue like a summer sky, and carried wildflowers Franklin had picked that morning. It was a simple ceremony but perfect for them. The wedding night was tender and careful, both of them navigating the newness of physical intimacy with patience and love. Franklin was mindful of what Theresa had been through, careful to make sure she felt safe and cherished. And Theresa, for her part, showed him a passionate side he'd only glimpsed before. They learned each other slowly, with laughter and gentle touches, building trust along with pleasure. They spent the first months of their marriage in Franklin's room above the general store while their house was being built on the land they'd purchased. It was cramped and not particularly comfortable, but neither minded. They were building something together, planning their future, and that made even the small discomforts worthwhile. The house took shape through the winter. Franklin did much of the work himself, with help from friends in town and occasional hired labor when the job required it. Theresa worked alongside him when she could, painting walls and helping with the lighter tasks. They made every decision together, from where to place the windows to what color to paint the shutters. By spring of 1879, the house was finished. It wasn't grand, just a sturdy 2-story structure with a wide porch and good bones. But it was theirs, built with their own hands and dreams. They moved in on a sunny April day, carrying their meager possessions across the threshold with ceremony and laughter. "Home," Theresa said, standing in the empty living room and spinning slowly to take it all in. "This is really ours." "Ours," Franklin confirmed, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "What do you want to do first?" "Christen every room," Theresa said with a wicked grin, turning in his arms. Franklin laughed and swept her up, carrying her toward the stairs amid her delighted shrieks. They settled into married life with surprising ease. Franklin continued his work as a deputy, though he was gradually building up their ranch. They started with a few head of cattle, then added chickens and pigs. It was slow going but steady. They weren't trying to get rich, just to build a sustainable life. Theresa kept working at the general store for the first year, but as the ranch demanded more attention, she shifted her focus to home. She planted a garden that flourished under her care, preserving vegetables for the winter and selling the surplus in town. She made friends with their neighbors, helping out when someone was sick or had a baby, building the kind of community ties that made a place feel like home. Their first child came in the spring of 1880, a boy they named Thomas Franklin Xavier. He was healthy and loud, with his mother's eyes and his father's stubborn chin. Franklin held his son for the first time with trembling hands, overwhelmed by the rush of love and terror that fatherhood brought. "He's perfect," he whispered, looking up at Theresa with wonder. "He is," she agreed, exhausted but radiant. "We made something perfect, Frank." Thomas was followed 2 years later by a daughter, Emily Grace. She was smaller and quieter than her brother, with dark curls and a thoughtful expression even as an infant. The house filled with the noise and chaos of children, and Franklin discovered that he loved it. After so many years of wandering, of being alone, having a full home felt like a gift he hadn't known to ask for. The years passed in the way they do when life is good, both quickly and slowly. Franklin left his deputy position to focus full-time on the ranch, which had grown into a modestly successful operation. They'd expanded their herd and bought an additional 100 acres from a neighbor. It would never make them wealthy, but it provided a good living. Theresa continued to thrive. She'd become a pillar of the community, known for her kindness and practical help when people needed it. She taught Sunday school at the church and organized charity drives for families hit by hard times. The frightened woman Franklin had found in the storm had transformed into someone confident and capable, though she still had nightmares occasionally about those dark days with Brennan. When that happened, Franklin would wake with her and hold her until the fear passed. They'd learned each other's darkness as well as each other's light, and loved each other through all of it. A third child arrived in 1885, another boy they named Henry. He was a surprise, as they'd thought their family was complete. But he fit into their lives as if he'd always been meant to be there, easy and happy in a way that made everyone around him smile. By the late 1880s, the Xavier Ranch was well established. Thomas was old enough to help with the cattle, taking to ranch work with natural aptitude. Emily preferred helping her mother in the house and garden, though she had a way with horses that Franklin encouraged. Henry was still young but showed signs of being the most adventurous of the three. Franklin and Theresa would sometimes sit on their porch in the evenings, watching their children play in the yard, and marvel at the life they'd built. It hadn't been easy. There had been hard winters and dry summers, sick cattle and broken equipment, all the normal struggles of ranch life. But they'd faced it together, and that had made all the difference. "You ever think about that night?" Theresa asked one evening, her hand in Franklin's. "When you found me?" "Sometimes," Franklin admitted, "though it feels like a lifetime ago now." "It was a lifetime ago," Theresa said softly. "Everything that's happened since, everything we've built, all of this started that night, with you stopping to help someone who needed it." "Best decision I ever made," Franklin said, "even though I didn't know it at the time." "Neither did I," Theresa said. "I thought my life was over. I thought I'd made such terrible mistakes that I'd never recover from them. But then you appeared out of that storm like an answer to a prayer I hadn't known how to say." Franklin brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You saved me too, you know." I didn't realize how lonely I was, how much I was just existing instead of living until I met you. You gave me purpose, Theresa. You gave me a reason to stop wandering and put down roots." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the sky. In the distance, they could hear their children laughing, and closer, the sounds of the ranch settling in for the night. It was ordinary and extraordinary all at once, this life they'd made. The years continued their march. Thomas grew into a fine young man, eventually taking over most of the day-to-day running of the ranch. He courted and married a girl from town, Sarah, and they built a small house on the Xavier property so Thomas could continue working the land. Emily showed an artistic talent and went away to San Francisco for a year to study, though she returned to Marysville with relief, declaring she was a country girl at heart. Henry proved to be the scholar of the family, devouring every book he could get his hands on and talking about becoming a lawyer. Franklin and Theresa eased into middle age gracefully, their love deepening with time rather than fading. They still took walks together in the evenings when weather permitted, still found excuses to steal kisses in the barn when no one was looking, still shared secrets and dreams in the darkness of their bedroom. Mrs. Patterson remained a fixture in their lives, a beloved friend and surrogate grandmother to their children. She was getting on in years but remained sharp and active, running her boarding house with the same efficiency she always had. She loved to remind anyone who would listen that she'd known Franklin and Theresa would end up together from the very first day. Sheriff Thompson had retired, replaced by a younger man, but he remained a good friend. He and Franklin would occasionally share a drink and reminisce about the old days, including the arrest of Marcus Brennan. Brennan himself had died in prison years ago, a footnote in their history that no longer held any power over them. By the turn of the century, Franklin and Theresa were grandparents. Thomas and Sarah had 3 children, and Emily had married a rancher from the next county and started her own family. Henry was in law school in Sacramento, visiting when he could. They were sitting on the porch one evening in 1900, watching the stars emerge when Theresa said, "We did all right, didn't we?" "Better than all right," Franklin replied. "We built something real, something lasting. Not just the ranch, but this family, this life. I'd say we did pretty well." 22 years, Theresa mused. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you found me in that storm. Other times it feels like we've always been together." "I know exactly what you mean," Franklin said. He was 62 now, his hair more gray than brown, his face lined from years of sun and wind. Theresa was 40, still beautiful in his eyes, though she complained about the silver threading through her dark hair. "Have I told you lately that I love you?" "Only about 100 times today," Theresa replied with a smile. "But I never get tired of hearing it." "Good, because I'm never going to stop saying it." They sat in peaceful silence, hands clasped, surrounded by the life they'd built from that single act of kindness in a storm. Their children and grandchildren were healthy and happy. Their ranch was prosperous. They had friends, community, and purpose. But more than any of that, they had each other. The years rolled on, bringing their share of joys and sorrows as years do. They lost Mrs. Patterson in 1903, mourning the woman who'd been such a cornerstone of their life together. They celebrated as Henry opened his law practice in Marysville, choosing to return home rather than chase opportunities in larger cities. They welcomed more grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. Franklin's hair went completely white, and his joints ached more in the mornings, but he still rose with the sun and worked the ranch alongside Thomas. Theresa developed a touch of arthritis in her hands but continued her gardening and her community work, adapting as needed. They'd been married 35 years when Franklin had a heart scare that landed him in bed for a week under doctor's orders. Theresa barely left his side, and he grumbled about being fussed over while secretly loving every minute of her attention. "You're not allowed to leave me," she told him firmly one night, her hand gripping his. "We have an agreement. We're growing old together, remember?" "I remember," Franklin assured her, "and I have no intention of breaking that agreement. You're stuck with me for a good while longer." "Good," she said, but he could see the fear in her eyes and understood it. They'd been together so long now that imagining life without each other was nearly impossible. He recovered fully, much to everyone's relief, and they continued their life together. They were the older generation now, dispensing wisdom and helping out where needed but letting their children take the lead. It was a good feeling, knowing they'd raised people capable of carrying on what they'd started. On their 40th anniversary, their children threw them a party at the ranch. It seemed like half of Marysville turned out, along with family from across California. There was food and music and laughter, toasts and speeches about the love story everyone knew. Franklin and Theresa stood together, surrounded by the fruits of their life together, and felt nothing but gratitude. "Thank you," Theresa whispered to Franklin as they danced together to a slow tune, "for stopping that day, for helping me when you had no reason to, for loving me when I didn't know if I'd ever be able to love again." "Thank you for letting me help," Franklin replied. "For trusting me when you had every reason not to trust anyone, for building this life with me, for 40 years of being the best thing that ever happened to me." They were well into their 70s when Franklin finally had to admit he couldn't manage the ranch work anymore. Thomas had long since taken over most operations, but Franklin had continued to help where he could. Now, though, his body was making it clear that his working days were over. It was hard to accept, but Theresa helped him through the transition, reminding him that they'd earned their rest. They spent their days quietly now, reading and visiting with grandchildren, taking slow walks around the property they'd built together. Franklin would sit on the porch and watch the ranch operations continue without him, feeling satisfaction rather than regret. They'd built something that would outlast them, something solid and good. Theresa's health began to decline in 1920. Nothing dramatic, just the slow winding down of a body that had worked hard for 7 decades. Franklin cared for her with the same devotion she'd shown him, patient and loving through every difficulty. Their children helped, taking turns staying with them, but Franklin insisted on being her primary caregiver. "You asked no questions and gave help," Theresa reminded him with a gentle smile one afternoon as he helped her back to bed. 42 years later and you're still doing it." "Always," Franklin promised. "That's never going to change." She passed peacefully in her sleep one night in early spring, Franklin's hand in hers. He woke to find her gone and felt his heart break in ways he hadn't known were possible. For 2 days, he couldn't seem to speak, could only sit by her bedside and hold her hand as if he could will her back to life. The funeral was large, befitting a woman who'd touched so many lives. People came from across the state to pay their respects to Theresa Xavier, who'd arrived in California a frightened refugee and built a life of purpose and love. Franklin accepted their condolences with grace, but inside he felt hollow, like half of himself had died with her. His children worried about him in the months that followed. He seemed to age rapidly without Theresa, losing weight and interest in things that had once brought him joy. But slowly, with the help of his family, he found a new equilibrium. Not happiness exactly, but acceptance. Peace with the knowledge that he'd had 42 years with the love of his life, which was more than many people ever got. He lived another 3 years, surrounded by the family he and Theresa had created. He told stories to his great-grandchildren about the old days, about meeting their great-grandmother in a storm, about building the ranch from nothing. He made sure they understood what Theresa had meant to him, what she'd meant to all of them. Franklin Xavier died in his sleep in the spring of 1923, in the house he'd built with his own hands. He was 85 years old and had lived a full life. His children laid him to rest beside Theresa in the Marysville Cemetery, under a simple stone that read Franklin Xavier and Theresa Dalton Xavier, together forever. The ranch continued under Thomas's stewardship, then passed to his children and their children after that. The Xavier name became synonymous with honest dealing and hard work in the region. But more than that, the story of Franklin and Theresa became legend, passed down through generations as an example of what love could build. It started with a chance encounter in a storm, with a cowboy who asked no questions and gave help to a woman in need. From that single act of compassion grew a love that lasted a lifetime, a family that spanned generations, and a legacy that endured long after both of them were gone. It was proof that sometimes the smallest choices, the simplest acts of human decency, could change everything. That love, when nurtured and protected, could weather any storm. That two people who found each other in the darkest moment could build something bright and lasting together. The ranch still stands today, maintained by Xavier descendants who know the story of their great-great-grandparents. Sometimes, on stormy nights, people claim you can see two figures on the porch, sitting close together and watching the rain. Whether that's true or just romantic fancy, no one can say for certain. But what is certain is that the love between Franklin Xavier and Theresa Dalton changed the course of both their lives, creating ripples that spread outward to touch countless others. It was a simple story in many ways. A man helped a woman in need. They fell in love. They built a life together. But in its simplicity lay profound truth about what it means to be human, to choose compassion over indifference, to build rather than destroy, to love courageously even when life has given you every reason to fear. Franklin and Theresa's story reminds us that we all have the power to be someone's answered prayer, someone's reason to hope again. All it takes is the willingness to stop, to see someone in need, and to help without asking for anything in return. Everything else grows from that one choice, like a seed planted in good soil that becomes a mighty tree sheltering generations to come.